thank you for having me on Sync. Thank you to all the attendees for being here. I'm here to discuss closing the gap between endpoint and identity protection. It's a pretty big challenge that we have today, and one that I think requires a tremendous amount of focus if we're going to be successful in countering some of these major attacks that continue to take place. Specifically, the ransomware attacks that we're reading about and talking about in the news every single day. It's a significant issue, and I think one that's going to continue to grow regardless of efforts by the current administration in the US to counter that. I think it's going to be a long road before we have any type of success in slowing these down by working with other governments. So let's jump into it a little bit. We know the attacks keep coming. In the last few years, we've seen cyber attacks, and especially these ransomware cases, continue to explode. And that's a little tongue-in-cheek there at the bottom. Why? Well, it's about the money. We've seen significant increases in the ransomware payments take place over the last few years. I just read, I think Brenntag was one that supposedly had the record for payment. I think it was Brenntag. And then we heard Colonial paid 4.4, JBS paid 11 million. So it's crazy, that these are continuing to go up. There's going to be, I think, a lot of discussions over the coming year about whether or not it should be illegal to make ransomware payments in the United States. And we'll continue to see where that goes. But there's already some rules on the books where it can be potentially illegal, because you may be violating sanctions by paying ransomware to one of these crimeware groups. So it's interesting, and I think one of the important pieces out of that we're not going to jump into, but I think is important to note, you should be working with law enforcement when you do get breached by ransomware, so you can ensure that to the best degree possible, you're not putting your own corporation at risk. So working with law enforcement can certainly be very, very helpful to you. So let's talk about the attack sequence a little bit. I want to jump right into the technical piece and move this camera out of the way so I can see here. There we go. When you look at the attack sequence today, we're still seeing the breaches. If you look at number one there, the vast majority of attacks are simply coming through phishing emails. We still fall for it. If anybody on this call has been around as long as I have, hopefully you realize that you're vulnerable to phishing attacks as much as anybody else if it's well crafted and you're targeted and they hit you as a human. And by that I mean, maybe you've got kids in a daycare or a school, and you subscribe to a news alert for local news for wherever you live, and somebody crafts one that says there's a fire or there's a mass shooting at that school. What most people are going to do is the human side is going to kick in before that pinch of paranoia kicks in, and you might click on that link. You might open that image. You might read that report. So you might open an attachment, simply not thinking, because suddenly someone in your family's at risk. So the attacks are going to continue, and they're going to be successful simply because we're humans, and we don't have the awareness sometimes, that can be short-circuited with a well-crafted attack. And when we look at ransomware today, it is more targeted. It's not like in previous years where it was opportunistic and people were going after specific vectors in the market today, simply looking for any type of vulnerable system. Instead, today they're picking companies, they're picking individuals, and they're going specifically after them, and then going after specific information as well to monetize it. So anyway, it doesn't matter if it's a phishing email or if it's a waterhole attack where you go to a web server and it's feeding malicious ads in, and you're vulnerable, and they knew that, and it's a site you hit every day, or any other route. Nevertheless, the attacks continue to happen, and our endpoints get compromised. When that attacker, if you look at number two, pops up on that compromised endpoint, that's of course where the challenges start. The first thing they do is reconnaissance and discovery. They check the user privileges. They look to see, information about the admins, service accounts, ACLs. They look at net sessions, high-value targets. They look at path to high-privilege users. Excuse me, I clearly have a frog in my throat today. But they're looking for information on that endpoint that can lead them across your enterprise so they can accomplish their goal. And that goal, of course, in new ransomware is to not only do a compromise, and not just to encrypt data, but before they encrypt data, to steal the data, take that data, and then encrypt the high value assets inside your environment, or to encrypt many systems, including the high value assets, and then hold you for ransom. And of course, that exfiltrated data means that they can show you they have sensitive intellectual property or email from your environment, and can potentially, extort you for money if you don't want to pay a ransom to get the key to unencrypt your systems. So they've got you coming and going, and it's really a new variant that we're seeing a lot of. And it's not just encrypting your systems today. If you look at number 3 on there, they'll move laterally to a domain admin PC, and look for those common local admin passwords and hashes. They'll steal domain admin credentials, save credentials. They'll look for, for shares on the systems. And then they'll go through and they'll create persistence on Active Directory. They'll create new domain admins or elevate their own privileges by that path they've taken to other domain admin. And then, of course, they'll move on to the high value targets, looking for either file servers, databases, or some executive system where there's potentially really important information. One of my favorites to think about, and how out of the box some of the attackers are thinking today, was an attack group called Fin4 that FireEye did some really interesting reports on a number of years ago. But they had gone through and they went after these different systems, and they were looking for information on potential investments and financial releases before they happened. So before trading was open on them, so they would steal this information and then make trades and make a ton of money on it. So really, it's like a high-end pump and dump scheme. So which was really, really interesting by stealing data. So this is a major challenge that we have today. This attack sequence that I just talked about. How do we break this up? How do we stop this from happening? When you look, if I can get this to advance, there we go. When you look, one of the key components of all these attacks is Active Directory. And protecting it is really, really hard. It's the treasure trove of all privileges and credentials. I like to call it the GPS of your enterprise. It knows where all the resources are, the users, credentials, the admins, and really, a compromise of Active Directory is catastrophic for most organizations. And quite frankly, most of the cases happening today involve Active Directory. If you talk to red teams, there's a couple really interesting reports out there, and they state that 90% of all attacks involve Active Directory. So, or I should say 90% of red teams use Active Directory in their attacks because it's a successful, easy way to go in and elevate your privileges and move laterally across the system. So if you're not thinking about protecting Active Directory and you have an Active Directory environment, you're going to fail. So it's a problem. By nature, Active Directory is not secure and it lacks intrinsic security. There's not a lot of tools and policies in the past that were out there that can help you protect Active Directory. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. So some of the challenges with it, a lot of organizations think about Active Directory as plumbing. It's the plumbing inside your organization, and people are really, really afraid to touch it, to play with it. Mergers and acquisitions have added additional components to it. And it's one of those things, it reminds me years ago at the Pentagon and a server that, everybody said, don't touch that. What's it do? Well, we don't know, but we don't want it to go down. And it's kind of the same thing with Active Directory. People are afraid to really go in and dig through it and find all the things that need to be cleaned up. And that's a really critical thing that we need to do. We need to fix it. Entitlement creep and over provisioning is certainly a really important one. There's way too many users that have way too many privileges, and many of them that don't need the privileges they have. So you should definitely have a policy that allows you to clean that up. You don't have visibility into orphan credentials, what's sitting out there inside the environment that you're not aware of. And monitoring for bad changes really is hard. It's a difficult thing to get through in Active Directory. And again, this is the key, one of the primary keys to protecting your system and cleaning it up before an adversary gets in. Today, people talk about cyber hygiene and how important it is. And we've been talking about cyber hygiene since 1996. And I like to say that Active Directory should be a component of your cyber hygiene. It should be integrated into those same processes and given just as much importance. So protecting Active Directory really requires continuous visibility. You need to understand the exposures and misconfigurations, attacks taking place, and changes in it. Is that an authorized change? Is it something that should have been done? or is that a nefarious act, and should you be digging into it? Isn't it an event that could potentially turn into a compromise? So things that you need to know. The institutional expertise is really important. You may be a smaller organization that has two admins that really understand Active Directory really well, maybe one. And what happens if that person leaves? Do you have the right structure to go in and track changes, to understand the environment, to know what can be deleted, what can't be deleted, the group policies? There's a ton of information. Active Directory is very complex and very difficult to maintain. So understanding it, as well as the changes, it's not static, that happens in any dynamic organization. It's critically important to have that expertise around Active Directory. We did a session not long ago, and I was surprised. I've now seen 2 chief information security officers that own Active Directory, which to me was really surprising. I've not seen that in the past. Do you have the available resources? I talked about that. Do you have the personnel, the right people? Do they have the training? Do they have the time? And are they putting the effort into it, or are they divided between multiple tasks? So all important things for understanding how to protect Active Directory. Some of the pillars of comprehensive Active Directory protection, really mitigating that risk. You want to remove the risk, if you look at the 2 blocks on the left, before a breach happens. Now, I should state right up front that everyone should have, and hopefully you do, an assumption of breach mentality. You want to understand, and quite frankly, all the way up across your board of directors, everyone understand that a breach is inevitable. When the breach happens, though, when it does come your way and they do get through, have you done all your due diligence and done everything you can to quickly detect the breach and clean it up as quickly as possible, so the impact is almost negligible in your organization? So the ransomware case doesn't actually happen, so you catch it quickly. They don't get time to exfiltrate data, and you kick that bad actor out and clean it up so they can't come back in that way. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, and hopefully many of you have made great strides down that path with an assumption of breach mentality. Active Directory, again, is critical for us to focus on and clean the system up so they can't use it against us when they come inside your environment. I always like to say we have home field advantage inside our enterprise if we take it, and we have to take it. So we have to go in and do this effort on a continuous basis before the breach happens. So again, patch systems, secure privilege accounts, least privilege access. And I'm not going to read all these to you, but I think it's really important to think about this. And as Jason said, we're going to provide a lot of this presentation to you in the future. I've got to look at some of it to make sure that I don't need to remove a few, but I think it's important that we understand Active Directory. We understand how the hackers can use it against us. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second, so that we can clean it up before it happens. And when they do get in and they go through, can you detect those live attacks? So if they try to do a golden ticket attack, can you see that? When they try to do reconnaissance with tools that shouldn't be utilized by that user, can you detect it? So, and can you detect persistence? So when the adversary comes in and they're stealing credentials, then they're living off the land. If they don't go in and violate any, maybe you've got Yuba system and you're looking for anomalous activity from users, if they don't violate that, can you catch them? And that's what's really, really important. SolarWinds is a great example of that, where it took one of the best IR teams 9 months to detect it, and no one else did across the board. So because again, if they're living off the land, it's very, very difficult to detect those attacks and stop them from happening. So the attack sequence, we touched on this a little bit. So what can the defenders do? We can disrupt the attackers when they conduct reconnaissance and discovery. We can stop them early so they can't do that reconnaissance. And we'll talk about how we can do that in just a second. And we can stop their downstream attack activities, so those get disrupted as well. And we can make sure they don't get accurate information. Again, home field advantage. This is our enterprise. It doesn't belong to the attacker. Everyone likes to say we have to be on guard 24/7, 365 days out of the year. Well, if you put enough effort into this, hopefully we can make the attackers, feel that they no longer have the advantage, and instead we're doing things that can, really put them back on their heels and make them unsure of the information they're looking at. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So when you're looking at continuous monitoring for Active Directory, you really have to keep watch for those changes that will give new exposures to, to a potential attack. New users and system accounts, new privilege accounts, changes to ACLs, on Active Directory objects, new domain controllers or trusts, reactivated or deactivated accounts are ones that are missed a lot. New replications and new attack paths. Managing the attack paths before an attack takes place can really help you a lot. And then watching those, so, in course of enterprise business can help you tremendously as well, so that attacker can't live off the land and you can quickly detect attacks when they take place. So what do? How do you see that reconnaissance or discovery targeting Active Directory from, data from endpoints? How can you ensure there's no mass AD account lockouts, disables, or deletions? How can you detect past the ticket attacks, golden ticket or silver ticket attacks? There's a lot that you can do, to counter this. And I'm jump right into it here after one more slide. You really want to remove, remediate, and reduce all of these vulnerabilities, all of these attack paths ahead of time. You want to mitigate exposed AD credentials. It's really shocking to me, how many attack paths you can find inside an organization as a red team, trying to help. And then you may get hit by an attack 6 months after the red team's been there, and there's new, because it's a dynamic system and there's new attack paths that you simply weren't even aware of. So it really takes significant effort to put together the right structure if you're doing it all with expertise, or put it in the tool sets with expertise to ensure that this is cleaned up ahead of time. So you've remediated dangerous delegation, you've shut down shadow admins. I remember talking to a CISO that discovered that there were all kinds of systems running inside their environment that they weren't aware of, simply because all of the admins thought they didn't have the right tool sets in place to run their systems. So that's really important to understand this so you can clean it up ahead of time. This is a really fun slide that the image in the middle is borrowed from Microsoft. It's one of their blogs. It's very, very interesting. And I think if you look at it, it's one of the things you can see is, the modern ransomware, the kill chains, all the lateral movement and the use of Active Directory, where you can really break this up, across the board. The payloads, those are very, very common today. You probably have seen all of them, or at least read articles about all of them. So it doesn't matter where the initial access is. The credential theft is an area that right there you can go through and you can drop solutions in place so you can stop their credential theft. Some user is running Mimikatz, why aren't you monitoring for that? Why are you allowing, a user to run Mimikatz? That should cause an alert for you. If you're not, then that's a problem. On abusive service accounts, that should cause an alert for you. If you're not, that's a problem. Credential vaults, so another area. If you look on the persistence side, that's another challenge that you have. If you see new accounts, that are being created, you want to be able to alert on that. The shadow IT tools I mentioned, group policy changes, you definitely want to see that as well. These are all things that you can detect on, and yet today, many of these ransomware cases, where this ransomware was used, one of these with these types, not detected, and the tools exist for you to detect it. And the other piece is the focus on Active Directory by many of these organizations that have been breached is simply not there. And that's kind of surprising to me. Again, Active Directory, maintaining it, managing it should be part of your cyber hygiene. If it's not, then you need to restructure your policies inside your organization. So let's talk about derailing some of these a little bit deeper. So derailing attacks targeting Active Directory, that ransomware comes in, infects the system, that adversary conducts recon to Active Directory right away. So what you can do is you can put a tool set on that endpoint where when they attempt to do the recon goes out, the Active Directory query comes back, and yet it's intercepted at the endpoint, and you provide deceptive information to that adversary on that endpoint, and they don't know, any real information about Active Directory because you provided deceptive information to them the entire time, as well as you get an alert and what happens. You know that that endpoint's compromised. There's somebody on there trying to make queries to Active Directory, and you certainly have an understanding now in your environment about catching an adversary early. And let's talk about that a little bit more. So what do we do for the Attivo Active Directory protection? We do a number of things. We do attack derailment. We alert on Active Directory attacks. We provide information on assessing Active Directory, and it really provides a lot more information than what you get today just on the SIM side or audit logs, which don't provide a tremendous amount of detail around Active Directory attacks or auditing Active Directory on a continuous basis. Even when you have an expert come in, to audit AD for you, it's simply a snapshot in time versus an assessment you can do at a regular basis so frequently and consume that information to update the system right away and take out any potential attack paths, mitigate those attacks before they happen, which of course, can take you off the front page news. Traditional identity protection, when you look at IAM, PAM, and IGA systems, all good, but more focus on the authorization and authentication, where we're focused instead right now on the assessment and attack detection and helping you protect Active Directory. A little bit more on that, here's an example with Acme Corporation. When you look at that compromised endpoint and they do a query to Active Directory, so we have a small bit of code that sits on that endpoint, so without touching Active Directory, and it provides deceptive information back to the adversary. We have some really cool videos on this that show you, what information you can put together to provide that attacker. So they think they found everything, and instead, you're providing fake information back to them. Now, the ADAssessor is one of our newer tools that is extremely popular, and it gives you visibility into Active Directory vulnerabilities and alerts for real-time attacks. So we'll help you clean up Active Directory before a breach happens, and then when an attack takes place, we'll alert you on it. What's really cool, it does all of this, both of those tools, without running on Active Directory itself. So we can do it from a single endpoint for the ADAssessor and running a tiny bit of code on the endpoints for AD Secure, so which is just a lot of fun. So providing fake Active Directory objects back to the attacker is just a really cool thing to do. And it's one of the reasons that we're seeing more and more information about deception in NIST cybersecurity framework with 853 revision 5, NIST 800-160 volume 2, and a number of other special publications from NIST as well, if that's your framework that you use, that are recommending deception. It's really taking home field advantage in the environment. So ADAssessor really gives you unprecedented visibility into AD, gives you a health score, it gives you test results on a continuous basis, a trust view, so the most vulnerable pieces that you have inside your environment so you can clean it up, as well as information from Microsoft directly in the tool as well to help you clean it up. So it's not a static report that you get, instead it's a walkthrough showing you how you clean up your systems, as well as what we see inside those systems on a frequent basis. So again, it's pre-attack for ensuring the adversary doesn't have those attack paths to walk through your system, and it's post-attack as well to quickly detect them and shut them down in a very quick fashion. So this is just another graphical image where you have a compromised system that attacker does a query for real accounts on Active Directory, and we let that query take place, but then we provide deceptive decoy creds back to that deceptive to that endpoint, so the adversary doesn't really see anything. And then if you're running the deception solution as well, you can send that adversary off with that deceptive information you provided back into a decoy environment in your unused IP space, which is just a lot of fun. So if you're an organization that wants to understand the adversary more, you can shuttle them off into a decoy environment that they can't pivot out of. Your production assets are protected, and you're able to study that adversary really and tie into and look at what the TTPs were. In fact, I don't have it on this slide in this presentation, but one of the things we've done in our dashboard is added MITRE ATT&CK as well. So you can look at all of the TTPs for MITRE ATT&CK and really start to understand the adversary if you decide you want to use the decoy environment as well, which is pretty powerful. And again, in the NIST cybersecurity framework now as well for a recommendation. So our entire structure today is really around at Attivo Networks around visibility, understanding credentials, understanding what the adversary is doing, and providing the capabilities to stop them. Reducing that attack surface. So, and then the asset defense, protecting those endpoints, because we all know perimeter was already going away, and yet as we moved into the era of the pandemic, COVID-19, and everybody suddenly had to work from home, now our perimeter is completely gone. Just blew up, pretty much overnight. We had to move very, very quickly to have a new structure where we have endpoints in cloud, or endpoints and a very small perimeter, which changes a lot of things that we have to do around protecting our infrastructure. So understanding Active Directory is a critical way, to ensure that the attacker may get in, but they're not going to be successful, and you catch them quickly. Really quick, I wanted to pop this up here. This is a review by Dr. Peter Stevenson on Cyber Defense Magazine. If it's too long, didn't read. So he says highly recommended, which is pretty cool. If you know him, he used to work for SC Magazine, and now he's over at Cyber Defense Magazine, an independent reviewer, and doing some pretty cool things. On the Active Directory piece, one of the things we've provided with so many ransomware cases, we're doing free assessments. So there's a sign up right there if you want an assessment of Active Directory and find out how you're doing. That's a really helpful path to take that we've had a lot of people jump into. And I think I am right at 30 minutes, as we talked about, Jason, so we can jump into the question side.
Absolutely fantastic, Tony. Thank you very, very much, Tony. Much appreciated. Fantastic comments coming into the chat here, which is great. So thank you all very, very much. And we do have plenty of questions here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Are you ready for this? Stop sharing the screen. Good stuff. Okay, let's go. First question, are there any countries where they have made it illegal to make payments for ransomware, to your knowledge?
That is a great question, and one I quite frankly don't have the answer to, and now I'm really curious and going to have to go do some research. So I don't know on that one. I would suspect there are countries that have made it illegal. That would be my thoughts, and probably some in Asia, but I don't have any definitive data on that. I would guess Singapore maybe, and maybe South Korea as well. They would be two, I think, that would lean in that direction based on their government. So, but I'm gonna go look at that. Thank you for that question.
No worries. And what's your perspective on that? I mean, it's obviously a bit of a tricky one, right? But we often get these things like, do I pay, don't I pay? I mean, your general guidance around that.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one. And, if you talk to any IR team, they're gonna not say much publicly, but one-on-one, they'll say really the answer will be it depends. And that's who attacked you, are they known to give you a key back? Have they been known to delete the data that they stole from you? Or are they one that you may not get everything unlocked? There were some reports that just came out where 67% of systems hit by ransomware encrypted, I think it was the number, and a good chunk of them got their data back when they paid the ransom. It was above 50%, but they couldn't decrypt all of the systems across the board. So I think honestly, in the United States, it's you're going to see less and less ransom payments. I don't think we're going to see as many payments, in the next, probably starting in 2022, as the government puts in place a number of new regulations and new laws, and tries to stop ransomware by minimizing payments so that there's no incentive for these crimeware groups.
It is a tricky one for sure. Question here: during the SolarWinds breach, attackers had a backdoor into potentially thousands of networks. Could this have been prevented using some sort of distributed deception technology?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we've talked about quite a bit. In fact, we've got a webinar coming up with my CEO, Tushar Kathari, and the CEO of SolarWinds, as well as Ed Omaroso, an analyst that runs Tag Cyber. That's week after next, I think it is. I can't remember the day. But nevertheless, so we had some discussions with them and with many others, and of course, been monitoring this situation. Could you have stopped that type of attack? Probably. Could you have detected it earlier? Absolutely, you could have. When you look at the length of time it took to detect this attack, they did not have a structure in there, any of these companies that were hit, to, or at least a structure that was implemented across their entire environment where they could have potentially detected the SolarWinds attack. We've written up a really good presentation on where Attivo fits into that and how we could have detected it, for some of these organizations had they had, our solution in place. So, and we have had, some organizations talk about how they detected some activity based on, the capabilities we provided them.
Awesome stuff. Thank you. Does Attivo provide assessment and recommendations for Active Directory?
We do. In fact, we do it with a tool set as well as, how to lay this out, and we'll help you clean up Active Directory and then provide, I won't say continuous assessment, but a structured, scheduled assessment that will help you take that dynamic environment and clean it up before an attack happens. So that is our ADAssessor tool. So that that we provide free trials of. People can go in and get a free assessment and understand the tool before they buy anything. So it's a pretty cool structure in an area we thought was really underserved, which is why we moved into the space to protect Active Directory. We've got a very robust business around deception, and we're continuing down that path. But we moved into helping protect Active Directory as well because a shortage of tools in that area that provided automated capabilities for what is a very complex area for most organizations to clean up. So yes,
and on that, that's great. Another hopefully simple one on the line of AD. Are AD attack alerts in real time?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We have a dashboard for that, and we've got integrations now with 32 or 34 different partners out there. All the major players. So we integrate with EDR tools, SIM tools, orchestration tools, so SOAR across the board. So you can drop the solution in there and then tie it in with your existing processes. So we're not remapping your processes that your SOC team may have. Instead, we fit into that and then provide integration in. So you can use ServiceNow for a ticketing system. You can go through if you're running pick, it doesn't matter, Demisto or whatever you're running for your playbooks. We tie into all of those processes across the board so you can get your alerts still in the processes that you have. You just suddenly have a lot more alerts. What's interesting is we find many organizations do that, but they'll go instead to the Attivo dashboard after they see an alert because they find out very quickly it's high fidelity alerts because the actions you see there typically are ones that should not be happening in your environment. So it doesn't alert as much, but when you see it, it's all hands on deck because you're being breached.
Thank you very much. What about CIM using AI? Any experience with this? I keep hearing how it will be the next stage in protection that doesn't rely on passwords and biometrics alone, but integrates other aspects to secure identity.
Yeah, that is a really interesting one. I apologize here. I have a timer going on my system and that I can't shut off, and hopefully nobody can hear that.
We can, but it's okay. There you go. It's gone for the most part.
Hold on one sec, Jason. I'm trying to kill this thing. Lost my mouse there. There it is. There we go.
That serves you right for trying to actually stick within the time, right? There you go.
Got it. Yeah, see that? Get punished for sticking to my time, right? Couldn't kill my timer. So actually, I'm going to have to mute that for the next time just so I see it and it's not bugging me. I usually am a minute or two early just to be safe. So can you repeat that question again? It was about CIM.
What about CIM
AI,
using AI? Yeah, any experience with this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I don't have a lot of deep experience in it. I've done a lot of reading on it. And, quite frankly, I think people touting AI today and its capabilities is a little overrated. When you think about the the billions of dollars dumped into Alexa and Siri and Hey Google, to me it's overrated at this point in time. And the fact that people think it's going to really help them defend their enterprise, I think is a little far-fetched at this point in time. So not to say it's not coming, not to say it's not going to be there in the future, but it's not there yet. And if somebody tells you that AI is going to solve all your problems, I don't believe them. Quite frankly, if any vendor comes in, and says that they've got a silver bullet, for your problems, throw them out because they're full of it. There's no perfect solution.
The hype curve is very much ahead of the reality curve in that respect.
Yeah, I would agree.
Gotcha. Do you think cyber insurance is a necessity, or is it just snake oil?
Do I think what is?
Cyber insurance is a necessity,
Oh,
or is it just snake oil?
yeah. I'm not a lawyer and did not stay at a Holiday Inn last night, Holiday Inn Express. But I will say, I think cyber insurance is important and will become more important in the future. But I think at this point in time, it's going to tick down a little bit because you've got all these ransomware cases that are coming up. And I'll give you an example I like to use. If you go get on an airplane today and you fly anywhere around the world, there's an insurance company or an underwriter, or a risk assessor that can tell you, any catastrophic failure on that plane and what the odds are of that happening. And then they have mitigation plans to ensure that doesn't happen with maintenance and then inspections of that maintenance to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's how you get insurance for these airlines and for these planes to fly. When you think about that today and trying to do due diligence in cyber, it's very, very, very difficult to do and to build that level of assurance inside, any organization today. For many people getting insurance, it's a checklist, have you done the right things? And it's pretty easy for the insurance company to get out of it. So the payments aren't really where they need to be for some of these attacks that are taking place. But in defense of the insurance companies, it's very difficult for them to assure that that organization did its due diligence to be able to stop, any targeted attack against them. And if it's a nation state, Katie, bar the door because, you're not going to be able to stop them. If you're a multinational bakery, it's not fair if a nation state decides to go up against you, you're going to lose in that battle. There's still many things you can do to detect them quickly, but the point is, your insurance may not pay out. They may have a clause even for nation state attacks, and most do. So I think it's kind of problematic today, but it's going to get better as we get better as building a due diligence model with a tiered structure. You must meet, this level of assurance for putting your infrastructure together and regular checks on it before we'll cover you.
Gotcha, thank you. Does Attivo, do you align to MITRE ATT&CK framework?
We do. In fact, we built it into our dashboard. We do a lot of work with MITRE ATT&CK. And we also do a lot of work with MITRE Shield, and they're redoing some of the things on Shield. If you're not familiar with Shield, attack is the TTPs of the known attackers. So with real data that's fed into it, so people understand exactly how the attacker, use their techniques to get through your environment. And the Shield side is a defensive structure to counter those attacker TTPs. So we fit into both sides. We map in our dashboard to show people how the attacker is moving through their environment, and we provide capabilities on the Shield side to counter that. So in fact, we are doing a lot more with MITRE, and stay tuned on that.
Good stuff. To reduce risk, what do you think on read-only AD's server in certain locations?
I think if you can do that, it's great, but on the other side of that, if you can set it up for read only and it's still providing enough information to an attacker on a compromised endpoint, they potentially could still use that information to find another attack path through your environment by understanding who the domain admins are. So I think it's good and it provides one piece, but nevertheless, you've still got to worry about the rest of your AD environment as well.
Thank you. Jumping back to ransomware again quickly, someone asked, should companies have their own crypto accounts or wallets to pay ransomware, or should they leverage third parties to facilitate payments just in case?
No, I would say leverage third parties, companies that have expertise in it. There's a number of them that do. There's law firms that are experts in this now. Any contracted, well-known incident response team that you would contract with as well, has expertise in this area and can help direct you to the right legal team. What I would recommend is it's a great time for the CISO and the general counsel, to have a conversation and talk about, some of these challenges and make sure the general counsel says, all right, I'm going to task somebody on my team to go in and do some due diligence on what companies we would potentially want to be under contract with if we got hit by a ransomware case. So not just the IR side, also the payment side.
Got you. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Jason, before we move on that, the one other piece, and I said in the presentation what I'm going to add here, but I think it's critically important that, that your senior team and your general counsel also knows your local field office for the FBI. And, that one of your first things you want to do is work with law enforcement, because they can really help keep you safe. you don't want to make a ransomware payment and violate sanctions. That could be a really nasty step for the company and put you, in some legal mire. So,
as if they don't already have enough problems. You don't want that as well. Exactly. And then I've got time for one last question. I think is quite interesting. So, going back to like the whole AI piece, but someone asks, have you seen any major attacks through Alexa, as they have big integrations with their BI and data warehouse data to Alexa?
It's a really good question, and I've not seen any public. The only ones we've seen generally have been consumer cases. Have there been any large attacks on that? There certainly may be. If so, Amazon hasn't disclosed them. And I haven't read about it anywhere. I think it's a really interesting point, and I think it's one that we may see challenges in the future. People talk about AI saving their bacon, in the future with AI that's designed to protect your enterprise. Well, on the other side of that, people are going to also design AI to attack your enterprise. So there is no silver bullet. There's no perfect solution. You got to do your hard work, your due diligence, and put stuff together. But one thing I would like to add at the end here is I really think it's critically important people start thinking about protecting Active Directory and cleaning it up as part of your cyber hygiene program. So that should be, if you're taking over a brand new role, that should be one of your primary goals. Move AD into, cyber hygiene as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, last week a CIO was telling me actually with Alexa, an update came out that nobody was made aware of. It happened very stealth. But essentially, if your Alexa loses Wi-Fi, it will try and pick up Wi-Fi from the closest Alexa device within your radius. So
sidewalk.
Yeah, exactly. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So people check your settings, because that happened, and not a lot of people know about it.
Just Google sidewalk, and then do yourself a favor, and I opted out.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And yes, Michael mentions here, Ring doorbell as well. Yep. That was quite alarming to learn. Well, that does bring us to a close of the first session. Fantastic stuff, excellent content, well delivered, and excellent contribution from the attendees as well, both in the chat and the Q&A. So as always at this point, I'd love to ask the audience to welcome me in a virtual round of applause for Tony. Really appreciate that, Tony, excellent stuff. And again, I offer a round of applause for the attendees for their involvement.